Well, thank you so much and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's House Talk on the Rum Hospital. Can I start by paying my respect to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the custodians of the land and culture of this region. I'd also like to pay my respect to the elders past and present and to any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are here with us today. Because every day we all live and work and connect and learn on land which is Aboriginal land. Now, for those people who I haven't met, my name is Ben Franklin. I'm the President of the Legislative Council and one of the two presiding officers, along with my colleague and friend Greg Piper, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. So on behalf of Greg and myself and the clerks and the Department of Parliamentary Services, can I welcome you all very sincerely here this evening. Tonight's talk is part of our House Talks program, a series of virtual and live events organised by our communications, engagement and education staff, featuring experts and special guests speaking on historical and cultural topics that relate to the history and functions of the New South Wales Parliament and the Legislature. And it's fantastic to see so many of you here this evening. In fact, we had so much interest in this event, the Rum Hospital, and it booked out so quickly that we had to move it from upstairs in the Jubilee Room down to the theatrette, and that's a great sign. I know we're all here very eager to learn more about the building that more than a few of us in this room tonight get to work in each day, and I wanted to take an opportunity to remind you that the New South Wales Parliament is not merely a building, it's actually an idea. An important idea that power emanates from the people. From the land's original custodians to our colonial past, and now to where we find ourselves today, a society moving every day closer to diversity and inclusion and empowerment of everyone. This land and this building are a testament to the strength of our democracy and the resilience of our institutions. It stands as a reminder that every individual, every community, and every region has a stake in shaping the future of New South Wales. As we all work together to innovate the future, it's so important to understand our profound history and preserve the legacy of our Parliament, a true people's house for generations to come. And who better to help us understand our past than our guest speaker tonight, Paul Brunton, Emeritus Curator of our State Library of New South Wales. Paul worked with the Mitchell Library's Australiana collections for 40 years from 1972 and was Curator of Manuscripts from 1986 to 2001 and Senior Curator from 2002 to 2012. Paul was President of the Australian Society of Archivists from 1991 to 1993. He's curated many exhibitions at the State Library and is the author of multiple publications, in fact, far too many to name tonight. He's currently preparing an annotated edition of the original handwritten journal and logbook that William Bligh kept on the HMS Bounty from 1787 to 1789, which I suspect will be an extraordinary read. In 2003, Paul was awarded the Centenary of Federation Medal for services to libraries, and in 2012, he was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for his services to Australian history through his various curatorial positions at the Mitchell Library. Now, in addition to the wealth of knowledge that Paul will be bringing to us tonight, we'll also hear from two others from the Department of Parliamentary Services, Lyndall Smith and Ryan Panton, who have led the largest, most complex and significant restoration and conservation project that this Parliament has undergone in its 207-year history. Lyndall is our Senior Program Manager for Capital Works Strategy and Delivery. A qualified architect, Lyndall has led this important project for the Parliament of New South Wales alongside Ryan Panton, who's also a Senior Manager for Capital Works Delivery at the New South Wales Parliament. Now, along with Lyndall and Ryan, it would be remiss of me not to take this opportunity to acknowledge the rest of the DPS team here at Parliament, led by Mark Webb. Every day I am so inspired by the impressive and passionate group of people from DPS who've been working literally day and night to restore and conserve our beautiful Parliament. And after Paul, Lyndall and Ryan speak, there will be an opportunity to hear from all of you and for you to ask the questions which are on your mind. History is more than just a collection of stories about the past. It's the foundation upon which we build our future as individuals, as a nation, and as a society. And to help us better understand the Rum Hospital and the foundations of this place, can I now welcome to the stage Mr. Paul Brunton. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that introduction. Thank you. Can everybody hear? Excellent. Well, my talk tonight is the Rum Hospital, the building that refuses to fall down. That is literally true. It's been a wreck more or less since it was, in fact, before it was erected, it was a wreck, and it's continued to fall down over the years. But it is nice, isn't it, to have a talk about a building in Sydney that refuses to fall down, rather than one that refuses to stay up, which is what we are often presented with now. So this little montage is rather whimsical, and it shows the Rum Hospital here. This is an original print which we'll come to later, but this just shows the Rum Hospital here, and of course Francis Greenway, the architect, wearing his hard hat and a crane. But this gives you some idea of how monumental the Rum Hospital was. Now, what was the Rum Hospital? It was a building 83 metres long on this side of McQuary Street, of which we're sitting in part of it now. And it was a hospital for the poor. And it was called the Rum Hospital because it was built from the proceeds of the importation of rum. Now, how did this come about? It came about because the recently arrived Governor, Lachlan McQuary, and here he's seen in a wonderful painting by Richard Reid, just as he was about to leave the colony in 1822, he was such a popular governor that Reid made a lot of money selling these portraits. So people were actually wanting to buy portraits of their governor. Now, McQuary was an interesting man because he wasn't the first choice for governor. In fact, he was the second choice. It's one of those, what would happen if the first choice came instead of McQuary. But he was the second choice. He'd had no experience in governing anything, really. He'd been in the army all over the world, Egypt, India, North America, Jamaica. He had a vast experience in the army. But the interesting thing about him when he came to Sydney was that he was terribly interested in building, because not just building in order to provide accommodation, but because of the rather Scottish Enlightenment belief, and he was Scottish, in a good environment made for good people. If you give the populace a nice environment to live in, an elegant environment to live in, they'll behave much better. Where he got this idea from, nobody knows. But it could very well be because he was educated for a few years around the age of 15 in Edinburgh, just at the time that the new city in Edinburgh was being built. And anyone who's been to Edinburgh and seen that would know the elegant Georgian buildings that are there. So he may have been inspired by that. He would also have been inspired, if in fact she didn't do all the work herself, by his wife, Elizabeth McQuary, who was extremely interested in architecture and brought with her to the colony at least one pattern book. A pattern book was a published book which gave images of various styles of building. So she at least brought one of those. And it could be that she was indeed the moving force behind McQuary being interested in building. we'll probably never know, although they have been called, Lachlan and Elizabeth McQuary, the first power couple in Sydney. And indeed they were. So it was McQuary who came up with the idea that how would he build this hospital, as he didn't have any money. And the British government had told him, you're not to build any new buildings without permission. He didn't pay much attention to that. He never paid much attention to those orders because it took 6 months for a letter to get to England and another 6 months for it to come back. So it was a full year before he got an answer to anything. So he thought it was easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. But he decided this would be the first public-private cooperation in Australia. And he got 3 businessmen, Alexander Riley, who was a merchant and pastoralist and one of the first settlers free settlers in Australia. And he lived on a large estate in which he called Raby, where the suburb of Raby now is. He got together with Garnham Blaxall. And here is, we don't have a picture of Garnham Blaxall, but we have a promissory note dated 1814, which he signed. And that reminds us that, of course, there was no currency in the colony. The British government had neglected to provide a currency for the colony. And so promissory notes were very popular until, that is, I promised to give you £1. Until McQuary started his own currency a little bit later, and that was the holy dollar and the dump. He got a Spanish coin, took the middle bit out, that was the dump, and that was 5p, and the holy dollar was 5 shillings. It costs you a lot more than 5 shillings now if you buy one at auction. Think in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're very rare. And so people use promissory notes, but they also use rum, which was a generic name for any sort of spirits. They not only use rum because they like drinking it, or they like drinking spirits, a lot of it, all the time, but also they would use it. They would barter with it. You give me, wheat, and I'll give you so much rum. So this was why rum was so important to the colony. And the other thing about Blaxall is, like a lot of our, well, not a lot, but some of our developers and entrepreneurs, indeed, he had to flee the colony and his creditors and died in exile, as some of ours have. Now, the third man that was involved in this was Darcy Wentworth. Darcy Wentworth was the father of William Charles Wentworth, man who really wrote the New South Wales Constitution. He came from a well-connected family, Darcy, but he'd fallen on hard times, and there's been some suspicion about why he actually came here. The fact that he'd been through 4 court cases for highway robbery, 3 not guilty verdicts and 1 no evidence verdict. But there's always been a suspicion hanging over him. However, when he got to the colony, he seems to have been an absolutely model citizen. He made a lot of money, but the governor, McQuary, appointed him to a number of positions, including he was a doctor, so he got a position as an assistant surgeon at first, and then a principal surgeon, and lived in the Rum Hospital then. But he also had a lot of public official duties, a few of which involved large sums of money, and he seems to have been absolutely impeccable in the management of those. Now, the idea was that McQuary would give these 3 men the monopoly on importing rum into the colony, and they would finance the building of the Rum Hospital. He thought this would all be kosher and that his masters in London couldn't possibly object to that. They did when they found out. And so they were going to build the hospital. It's going to cost the government very little. They'd give them 20 convicts and they'd give them some oxen and things, but by and large cost them very little. If they could import 45 gallons of rum, they would have to pay duty on the rum, so the government would get its cut as well. And they had from the 1st of May 1811 to the 1st of May 1814 to finish it, start and finishing date. Of course, they didn't keep to that. There's a lot of themes that we can recognise from current building projects. They didn't keep to that. I don't think McQuary actually told them that, yes, they did have a monopoly, but the government and army could import its own quantities of rum. So they didn't know that. Then the whole thing got messed up because McQuary had forgotten that he'd asked the British government if private people could start bringing in rum into the colony and pay import duty, of course. And the British government had already started authorising this. So he was going to have these extra people coming here with rum. So he had to extend the contract so that they could import even more rum, 60,000 gallons. So they did. Now, it was unsure who designed it. It wasn't Francis Greenway. We'll come to that in a moment. But here is a plan of it, which is in the Colonial Office in London, or in the Public Record Office, formerly in the Colonial Office. Now, it's basically, but not exactly, as the building was built. So here we are, sitting in this outbuilding. Here's the main building, and here's the other building. Now, this is the Mint, as we know it today. This is Sydney Hospital, demolished and completely rebuilt, and this is Parliament House. And it's been Parliament House since 1829, or at least the predecessor to Parliament. And so it's the oldest public building in Australia that has been used for the same purpose. Now, we can imagine that, as I said, 86 metres on the top of McQuary Street. The other strange thing is that McQuary gave them McQuary Street to build it. It was the best street in the colony, and certainly the one he wanted to be the best street in the colony. He named it after himself. And it did become the posh street of the colony. So he's making a statement here that it's a posh street for posh people, but the poor are going to be represented here too, and they're going to have their elegant flash hospital. So work went on for much longer than it should have. We don't know. James Bean was the person who supervised it all, of which we don't know much about. He was a carpenter. And a mason, a stonemason called O'Hearn, who was often tipsy, was the other person we know involved. And then, of course, convicts. Now, you'll be surprised to learn, this being Sydney, that building materials disappeared from the site, ended up in private possession. Fancy that. Yeah, I know you won't believe that, but that's what happened. Now, originally, there was a veranda around all sides of those buildings. So what we see now in front of the Mint and what we see in front of Parliament House was around the three of the buildings. And there was a stone wall enclosing the whole area, and it was 7 acres because it was very much the feeling of the time that fresh air and pleasant garden would help you. Now, when it was finished in 1816 and handed over, they knew it was a dud job. And so Francis Greenway, who was a trained architect, he had recently arrived in the colony, and McQuary grabbed him and said, right, you are going to be the colonial architect, and I'm going to be able to build things with you. And of course we know Greenway built some fabulous things, St James's Church, the barracks, St Matthew's, Windsor, etc. And he was given the job of looking over this building and seeing what was wrong with it. There's a bit of a dodgy background to Greenway too, actually. He came as a convict, and he forged a signature so obviously, so clearly, that he knew he'd be convicted for it. He was an architect. He worked in Bristol. Some of his buildings are still in Bristol. And so the thought is that he deliberately wanted to be transported because he was in a spot of bother in England with money. Some people did this because they knew that they could start life over again. And you've got a lot of benefits here. You've got free land. You've got a much better environment to live in, much better food. And so it's thought that he deliberately did this. It was a bit of a risk because the penalty for forgery was death, but the British judiciary was very loath to actually pronounce that sentence. So you could take the risk, and he did it, others did it too. And he became a very notable architect, although died in poverty. Now, his summary of the situation of the hospital was: the stonework was rotting, there were weak joints in structural beams, dry rot in the timbers, the foundations were in a dangerous and mutilated state requiring immediate attention, and it must soon fall to ruin. The pillars, and they're the pillars around the buildings, which we can see today, which Mr Superintendent O'Hearn, that's the tipsy one, previously stated to be a credit to the colony, reflect as little credit upon the judgment of the colony as they do upon the profound knowledge of the architect. There is no classical proportion in the column. Its shaft is set wrong upon its base, the cap is set wrong upon the column, and is of no description ancient or modern. And another architect who actually was a competitor of Greenway and had no reason to say nice things about Greenway's report, added about the Rum Hospital, it had been put up with such manifest neglect and inattention to durability that one would really imagine that it had been built for the very purpose of exhibiting the striking effect which such a structure would produce when in ruins. So finally, after this, another £5,000 worth of work had to be done, and finally it was handed over in May 1817. McQuary called it a spacious, ornamental and most useful building, every sort of judicious ornament, he said it had, and it was a hospital for the poor. Now, unfortunately, they'd forgotten to provide a morgue, so the room out the back, which would have been the kitchen, had become the morgue, and fires had to be lit in the building for cooking. There wasn't much they could do in hospitals in 1817. There were mainly two treatments, either bleeding or a diet of calomel, which was a purgative made of mercury chloride. So I think if you weren't dying when you arrived in hospital, there's a good chance that you'd be dying when you left. Now, I want to show you this because this is an early engraving by a convict from an original painting by James Wallace, who was in the army. But you can see there, you can see the bulk of it again, just how it's on a hill. Sydney is a valley. We can't really see that clearly today, but if you look down Hunter Street, you'll see how it goes up, down, and then up to the rocks. So on one side, you had this huge monumental statement of McQuary, and that's just an enlargement of it. It was terribly bulky. Now, this is by Close, by Edward Charles Close, who was also in the army. And this shows you the really how it is a valley going down and then up into the rocks, and how here it is a monumental statement. This is a place for the poor, and an elegant place for the poor too. Now, in the Major Taylor Panorama, which is you can see here. This was 1821, just after Macquarie's reign, to show how good Macquarie was and how he'd left their place better than he found it. Was a bit fanciful, but it's a lovely drawing. With, you see here, you've got a couple of soldiers chatting and a dog running and someone doing firewood, someone putting the washing out, and then the next one you see. This is from, say, the Rocks. This is from Observatory Hill. And this building is the military hospital. And that building, you would think, would have been perhaps not so much of a model, it's 1815, but they're coming from the same pattern book, aren't they, for the Rum Hospital. That's very much like the Parliament Building or the Mint Building. There's nothing like this had been built before, and it has a very Indian background. I mean, the word veranda comes from India, so where Macquarie had spent so much time. But you can see, so this was a military hospital, which was built more or less at the same time. It still exists. It's encased in the Fort Street Girls High School, which is now the National Trust Centre. But that building actually still exists. And that's just a third panorama, which is looking over the harbour. Now, we have the Parliamentary Building, we have the hospital, and we have the Mint. Now, this building, as I said, was used from 1829 as the Executive and Legislative Council. They were advisory bodies only to advise the governor. They didn't have any legislative power. And they met in the Wentworth Room. I think some of you have been to the Wentworth Room. Have you? Here? No, they didn't. Well, you can always go another time. The Wentworth Room. And but they did share it with the dissecting room for the hospital and a collection of stuffed birds, which was the rudiments of the beginning of the Australian Museum. Well, when we get to 1843, we get to representative government. This was partly elected. And so the Legislative Council was enlarged, and there would have to be some room for it now. It couldn't just meet in the Wentworth Room. So it was decided there'd be an addition to this parliamentary building. And Edward Winstanley was the architect. Here he is at the time rushing around Sydney, man about town. And there he is as an older, staid, very respectable architect, as architects become. And so here, this is from a book called Joseph Fowles' Sydney in 1848, and here is what he did. He added on this bit for the new Legislative Council. Of course, it exists today, has had some additions to it, and it is now the Legislative Assembly, which you would have visited. And here we have, there it is, the picture of it added on with a further addition on the side. And this is inside, which has not changed very much at all. Now it's the Legislative Assembly. And this is Wentworth on the wall. This is a picture recently of the same painting on the wall. Wentworth, of course, had drafted the Constitution in 1853, or would in 1853, and so this has remained on the wall there since 1859 in the now the Legislative And this is a picture of the gardens outside the building. Now, we haven't got quite up to the Legislative Assembly yet, but looking back here, we're still with just the Legislative Council, 1843 onwards. This is John Ray's portrait of Sydney, picture of Sydney, and St James's Church. And here you see the three buildings, once again, dominating the town and the steep rise up to the top. And Hyde Park, which was never the beautiful park that it is now because it was the local racecourse. McQuary introduced racing into the colony. And so there you see the barracks and the mint and a little bit of the main building. Now, Macquarie Street in the 1840s was becoming fashionable, and so people were moving in despite the fact that this great monument to the poor was on the eastern side. And on the western side, this is again from Fowles, you get a whole lot of interesting private dwellings. This was actually the parsonage for St James's Church. This would be King Street here, and you get these. This is a Wesleyan chapel. Then you continue on, and you get big houses like that, which is Burdekin House, which was again a wealthy merchant, and he built this for himself in 1841. It would be directly opposite here, opposite Parliament House, but it was knocked down in 1933. You have a number of doctors who live up here. Then you come down here, and you've got, would be Hunter Street, and along here is Horbury Terrace. Now, two of those terraces still exist across the road from here. And then you go down here, you've got on the corner of Bent Street, the old library building, and again, a lot of very fine houses here. John Fairfax lived here, also other newspaper men. So it was becoming quite a posh street, and the town was becoming rather a fine town. This one I like because this is Stephen Butts, who'd made his pile as a commercial traveller and a publican. And so what did he do? He bought a flash house in Macquarie Street, very flash, and has himself photographed on his horse outside, as much as some people have themselves photographed with their cars. And his wife and children get very much over here into the background. But you can see what a nice area it was. Now, in 1856, the Parliament changed again. It was responsible government, and it meant there were now all elected. It became the Legislative Assembly. All the positions were elected, and there was the older Legislative Council became a nominated upper house. And Wentworth had gone to England to see this put through, to see this passed by the British Parliament in 1855. And it was the achievement of really his life's work to get representative government in Australia. Actually, he wanted the upper house to have peers in it, but this was so howled down by the populace, who called it a bunyip aristocracy, that he had to modify his plans, and it was simply nominated by the governor. So at that stage, what to do, where to put the Legislative Council? So they first thought that they'd put an addition on to the... that's Burdekin House. It's very nice, elegant building. Now, they'd put an addition to the... here for the Legislative Assembly, and the Legislative Council would remain here. But then they decided that, no, that wouldn't be a good idea, because the Legislative Assembly must have a better place than the Legislative Council, naturally. Of course, I would apologise to Mr. President Franklin, if he were here, but that was the thought. And so they decided that the Legislative Assembly would stay in this building, which by this stage was pretty crummy too. They had a dreadful report on it from that particular age. The Legislative Assembly, it was refurbished and repairs made. They would stay there. And what to do with the Legislative Council? They imported an iron building which was going to Bendigo to be accommodation there on the goldfields, and they put the Legislative Council in this iron building from 1856. It must have been hot in summer. And here you can see I don't know whether you did go to the Legislative Council. These are the packing cases that that iron building came in. They were all packed in cases, a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, or they were numbered and you put the whole thing together. And so these form the lining in the walls of the Legislative Council. Well, of course, it wasn't very good, the Legislative Council, even though it was a new building. It started to fall down pretty quickly. And here we have, in the 1920s, they had to put these posts in to hold up the roof, and also posts to buttress it outside. By 1954, when the late Queen was coming to open Parliament, and of course in the Legislative Council, they had to do another refit, lest it fall on her head and the Elizabethan age come to a pretty quick end. Now, just to finish off, this is just to show something. It's quite an elegant building which was built behind the Parliament building. Of course, room was running out. This was their refreshment room. Kitchens below, rather nice dining room on the top. Now, it's Parliament. What happened to this? This is a rather rare photograph of the hospital building. Well, it remains a hospital, still a hospital, keeps going as a hospital into the 1870s. And there is the mint, what we call the Mint building. It had been a mint from the 1850s. And so they pulled it down. They wanted a new hospital, they pulled it down. And this is a brilliant photograph of that big main building. Took a year and a half to pull it down, 1879 to 80. Taken probably from St James's Church spire. This is the exhibition building in the Botanic Gardens, which burnt down, so that dates it. And this building here was built in the 1860s for the nurses that Henry Parkes brought out, who'd been trained by Florence Nightingale, the first nurses, trained nurses in the colony. And so Thomas Rowe won a competition in 1880 to build a new hospital block. There were problems over that too. It went over budget, what's new, so it was suspended. Then Thomas Rowe was sacked and another architect came in called John Kirkpatrick. And finally, in 1894, it was opened again as the new hospital, which we have today. And of course, over time, there's always been movement to move it somewhere else, of course. And here, just to finish, is a plaque in the footpath so that they were going to knock down the whole thing, everything, Mint, Hospital and Parliament House, and make a proposed law courts. This is only one of the many proposals that have been made to get rid of this building here and the Mint building and the hospital. But they're still here because Parliament and the Mint won't fall down, even though McQuary had a lot of trouble and there's been endless trouble since. So we should celebrate the fact that Parliament won't fall down. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you for joining us tonight and thank you to Paul for your wonderful presentation. I'm so happy that you're all here to learn about our wonderful Parliament, the oldest legislature in Australia. We're from the Capital Works team, and we're currently delivering the last a major redevelopment and an urgent program to address decades of deterioration, decay, end-of-life services and materials, safety and compliance. And for those of you who toured the chambers today, you can probably understand a bit more about what we've been doing. The historic Rum Hospital and both legislative chambers are part of this program of work and are the subject of this talk this evening. On screen, you can see Sydney University students who actually are in the Parks room looking at the original lath and plaster ceiling and wall and some wallpaper that dates back to the 1860s. So we're trying, I guess, with this program of works to make it a bit of an educational exercise for the younger generation of heritage enthusiasts. Throughout the course of the project, we have continually questioned what we have found. A quote from architectural historian John Freeland provides some insight on the challenging environment and conditions the original builders faced in the 1800s.
So Freeland goes on to say, even without the drenching downpours of rain, the shrivelling heat of the summer sun, extremes they had never known before, or the silent or hidden depredations of fungus and insects, the builders of Sydney would have had a hard job to erect these buildings even moderately well. Against these odds, they had almost no chance. Almost every building was constantly repaired, re-roofed or shored up just to keep it standing. Sydney, despite its attractiveness, was mouldering away.
I love the word mouldering because that's what it was really doing. As Paul's presentation informed, the Rum Hospital was originally comprised of 3 buildings of an enormous scale for the time, situated on 7 acres of land. The scale of these buildings at that time was just so impressive, and I guess the commitment to build these buildings with the 20 convict labourers, we think about those convict labourers as we're doing these works quite often.
So between 1891 and 1951, the facade was repainted a total of 8 times. Over time, these changes to the facade made it difficult for the public to really appreciate the scale of the building and to tie it in with the southern wing of the Rum Hospital. These images on the left show Parliament as it was up until November last year and the Mint in its current state. A major benefit of our current project is to reunite these 2 famous wings in Sydney.
If Greenway seems familiar, from 1966 to 1993, the first colonial architect was celebrated on the back of the $10 note, with architectural details of St James Church, Hyde Park Barracks and St Matthews in Windsor. What we thought would be interesting for tonight's talk is to go through some of the key statements in Greenway's 207-year-old report and show that the issues raised then remain relevant today. There was a report finding that masonry in the basement was too thin, not square, and laid with too much mortar.
So all the way back in 1816, Greenway noted the poor quality of the masonry. During the current project, we've removed many layers of paint to the basement stonework, and for the first time, we're able to clearly see what Greenway was talking about. Today, it is now known that the painting sandstone with impervious paints can lead to significant issues of trapping moisture and in introducing decay into the sandstone. This decay and dampness will be attributed to mould internally. The old processes of lime washing allowed moisture to exit and allowed the stone to breathe naturally, but years of acrylic paint had exacerbated problems of mould. In this project, we've removed multiple layers of paint and damaging cementitious mortar, and repointing is currently underway with traditional lime mortars. Another report finding from Greenway was the tie beams across the roof were made in 3 pieces instead of the 1 as specified.
So the image on the screen is of one of the beams that are actually in the roof today, with the joint clearly shown. A major issue that Greenway had noted was the poor quality of timber used in the construction of the building. During the subsequent committee inquiry, the builders defended their work, of course, and claimed it was not possible to procure straight timber in the colony. However, the architectural historian Morton Herman has noted by as early as 1803, timber was being shipped to England from Sydney, ironbark, stringy bark and mahogany were all exported. In one shipment, 70-foot long lengths of timber had to be cut to fit into the ship's hold. As you can see in these two images, some of the floor bearers are barely wide enough to even fit the nails. The photos show the poor quality of the original timber construction and poor selection of materials. We were fascinated to see most of the timber was not even milled, but was simply cut logs with bark remaining. These photos are from February this year, so those timbers have been there for a very long time.
So underneath the members' lounge, which is adjacent to the Legislative Council chambers, we've removed a total of 30 cubic metres of spoil from below the floor structure. Removing this amount of spoil has allowed the building to finally get the necessary underfloor airflow. And removing the spoil, we've undertaken archaeological investigations, and we've found 2 beer cans from the 1980s. Another one of Greenways' report findings was the shutters were poorly framed throughout the Rum Hospital.
Due to his experience in India, Governor McQuary understood the benefits of wide verandas and shade in a warm climate. We are fortunate to still have original shutters on many windows. Over the years, to minimise damage, the shutters had been nailed permanently shut in the open position to protect them. When the shutters were unfolded as part of our works, the original paint colours were revealed. We have kept the original paint colours and some early graffiti unaltered for future generations to discover.
Another one of Greenways' report findings was the sash window frames were too short for the openings.
The keen-eyed among you may have noticed that the western window sashes facing McQuary Street have only 2 panes of glass each. These are not original and were likely replaced in the 1980s, we're not sure. Only the eastern wall retains the original colonial 12-pane windows, and that's the image on the right. The Rum Hospital's eastern upper floor corridor was originally a veranda that had been enclosed many years ago. The wall on the right is the original external wall of the Rum Hospital.
The last room at the southern end of this corridor has provided great intrigue for the heritage experts involved in the project. We've discovered evidence of another original window opening which had been bricked in at some point. On the original veranda stone wall, there was 1980s plasterboard which was concealing this timber panelling. When we removed the contemporary plasterboard, we were able to finally reveal these timber boards for the first time since about 1860. There's a stamp on one of the timber panels which goes all the way back to Boston in America. The timber species has been identified as white pine by a company in Boston called Flint and Kent, which was responsible for the in-demand white pine timber in North America. Behind the timber panelling revealed the original, what is believed to be the original sandstone, would be the eastern facade, and then there's the original window opening. Works are underway to reproduce a window which would be built to match the existing, which is found also in the corridor.
Paul has explained the problem with the columns, and I guess we could talk all night about problems with the columns. But raised as a safety concern all those years ago, column safety and condition has formed a significant component of our project. Interestingly, as you can see in this picture, the upper columns are of timber while the lower columns are made of sandstone.
Each of the sandstone columns are being carefully repaired using conservation best practice, and the stonemasons are doing as much as necessary to repair the columns, but as little as possible.
Recently, one of the stone columns was found to be structurally defective. A new column made from Sydney sandstone has been prepared by our skilled stonemasons and has recently been installed. one of the timber columns exhibited extensive termite and, shall we say, slug damage, resulting in the majority of the internal structural components being eaten out. We are currently undertaking a conservation repair using ironbark timber plugs to restore the structural integrity of the column, and Western red cedar will be used to repair the bottom of the columns at the column bases.
When the facade works are completed later this year, the prominence of Australia's first parliament will once again be experienced by all who visit. The facade works include sandstone, timber and cast iron in need of urgent repair. The continuing tradition of many important trade skills is fundamental to the success of this project.
The success of this major project is due to our heritage experts, their passion, drive and respect for the place. The architects, engineers, botanists, stonemasons, plasterers, wallpaper makers, upholsterers, painters and gilders, furniture restorers, carpet layers, and of course our talented builders who are delivering this project at a challenging time for so much work occurring in our precinct. The young man on the right of the image is actually an apprentice on his first day, repairing the columns here at Parliament. You can just imagine what a joy he has working on these amazing old columns and what a career he'll have in the heritage industry. We greatly appreciate the experts sharing technical knowledge to younger tradespeople, students and our team throughout the project. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a few moments for questions tonight. If you need to leave and get to that Matilda's game, please, feel free. But so we have got an opportunity here for some questions. Oh, by the way, if you are the owner of that mobile phone and Opal card, please see me at the end. So would you like to ask our speakers a question? Okay, the lady just over here. Oh, the lights. Can we have the lights up? Oh, sorry about that.
Hi, thank you. Those presentations were fantastic. I'm wondering, given the floor plan and layout in the upper story of the Rum Hospital has changed over the sort of 200 years that it's been it's been used for different purposes, how you balanced, the desire to return it to its original floor plan versus reflecting that change in use over time.
Thank you. That's a wonderful question, and it's a challenge that all of our heritage experts working on the project have had to contend with. We, through this project, have actually identified more older walls than we thought we had. And I guess with the idea of modifying a heritage building to be fit for a contemporary workplace, there was an idea that those walls were to be removed, and we've quickly had to adjust our thinking to make sure we can retain those walls for the future. So there's some new knowledge that we've gained through the project, which will go back to inform a future iteration of the conservation management plan. And I guess the benefit we've had is the ability for experts to provide us some really robust dating on some of the lime mortars used in particular, which has helped to define the age of some of those original elements.
Thank you. Another question. Okay, just down here at the front.
Thank you. Great presentation from all three speakers. Thank you very much. I have a question about the beer cans. What happened to them?
I can confirm that the beer cans were empty, and they're just currently in storage with our collections team. So they'll be put on display somewhere in the future, I dare say.
Okay, anyone else? Yes.
Thank you. Question, you mentioned the medical facilities. Mercury was one of the two pharmaceuticals they used. Is the site contaminated, or parts of the site contaminated with mercury residuals?
I'm not sure if anyone can answer that. No, no, we don't think so. We're hoping not, actually. Yes.
Mine's nice. I probably can shout loud enough. Mine's nice and simple. Given the history of budget overruns, how are you going with your new one?
You'd be happy to know that our project is on time and on budget.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more. Okay, this person down here, thanks.
Darlinghurst Jail was being built roughly around the same time by Mortimer Lewis, and of course it's famous for a couple of its walls with the convict signatures etched into the sandstone. Have you come across any such thing here? Is any of the sandstone carrying any of the marks of the early convicts?
Convict arrows on
That is a really good question. Most of the mason's mark would have been in the beds, so top bed or bottom bed or the joints. We haven't really deconstructed that much original masonry, so to date we haven't come across any convict marks like that.
So there are convict bricks were found though? The bricks. And, oh yes, I've got a lovely collection of nails. I'll be using them with the students. Any other questions? Yes, over here.
I think the first big makeover of the building, when there was a sense of heritage, is the one that was started late in the Askin government's time and completed when Neville Wran came into office. And it sounds as though yours is the next big makeover. So that's kind of 50 years of perspectives on heritage. What did they do wrong that you would never do in the 1970s one?
Lyndall, that's you.
That's a good question. I guess over the 40 years, care for our heritage, the procedures and the protocol has changed. And what we are so thankful for is that 40 years ago, they did sheet up that old wallpaper and they did protect the things that were important. And we were fortunate to find them in really good condition. We are fortunate that today there's better technology, there's better lighting, there's better services, smaller mechanical systems. We don't have to put those intrusive elements into the building anymore. We can take them out and restore the building back to its original proportions internally. We're thankful that the work that was done in the 1980s was done with the greatest of care. And we are confident that our experts who are working with us today are also really caring for this place and providing us the right advice to make sure that we are doing the right thing for this generation.
Okay, as you can see, people are quite passionate about this building. It is a magnificent place. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Where do you find the tradespeople?
How do I answer this?
The government list.
Good question. Part of me wants to say we're still looking. However, all of the trades we use and the contractors are pre-registered on government schemes. And each contractor or subcontractor is vetted a lot to determine experience on similar projects of similar nature. So we have a fair idea of who we're working with before we sign them up to a contract. But in saying that, the contractors that we have on site are actually really engaging, and they're just as passionate as we are for the project. So they don't come on board lightly. They know exactly what they're getting into as well. But we're very happy with the contractors that we have on site.
Yes, just here.
Contractors. I worked for the Public Works Department in the 1980s, which put me in these buildings.
We want to pick you up on on the film.
Sure. So I worked for the Public Works Department, and we were based in different buildings. My building was the Lands Department building, where I spent many years. I was an electrician. I didn't have control over heritage issues or some of the larger construction things. But unfortunately, at that time, we were seeing the sort of neoliberalist ideas of getting rid of all what we were known as day labour, even though we were permanently employed, but of all employees of the Public Works Department as tradespeople, and bringing in contractors. And then subsequent to that, we've seen the sale of that building, and it's now under wraps. I don't know what's actually happening. I think it's being converted to some sort of a hotel or something. It's in private hands. And so I think that the issue of heritage should really be connected to some of that social aspect. The workers, we were based in particular buildings for many years. We knew the buildings inside and outside. We were almost like the custodians of those buildings. And by just bringing in private contractors, I think an immense amount was lost, as happens with the privatisation of the whole buildings themselves.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there was a question there. Yeah, it's a big one. We're not selling the building. Okay. Mark Webb is here, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Department of Parliamentary Services. I don't think he's putting the building up for sale. In fact, he would not be allowed to. Yeah, the thing that has...
Megan, I'd say I think the balance we have with having dedicated people like Ryan and Lyndall in the building and bringing in that expertise from the outside is a wonderful balance for this place, and it means that we can get the best that's out there but also have those people inside the organisation that are passionate about keeping the building in the state that it is. So I think they probably deserve a round of applause. So well done, guys.
Okay. Sorry, I'm half blind. So over here. If I've missed anyone else,
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I had two questions. Firstly, how did you overcome the challenge of maintaining public access to the Parliament as a public space throughout these works? And secondly, there was an excellent question about the changes in heritage standards from the works that were started to construct the tower to today. How did you navigate the challenge around, say, providing for disability access in a modern context when upgrading what is a heritage and historically significant building?
Lyndall, I think that's got your name on it.
Thank you for your question. I guess over the last 6 months, we've been working on this project with an operating precinct. So for those of you that visited the chambers, there was a crazy 5.5 to 6 month program to get those chambers ready for the opening of Parliament in May. To enable the Parliament to open in May, we have a different contractor working on the Rum Hospital who had to provide access through their construction zone. So through all of the works that we're doing on the precinct, collaborative construction is the strong message here. We've got builders who actually care about the operation of Parliament and making sure that these public events can proceed as easy as possible, recognising the challenges accessing the building today. In terms of accessibility, there's always a challenge, I guess, even in the 1970s building. There are parts of that building that aren't completely accessible. we are working within a 10-year master plan to really address some of these issues, and we've got future works to improve accessibility across the heritage buildings, but also the modern building. If we think about the Rum Hospital itself in particular, prior to these works, the floors were very up and down. It wasn't a true accessibility issue, but people who could walk into those rooms would fall over because of the slope that was in the floor. With these works, we're trying to address that safety aspect. There are other works in the pipeline in the future where we'll be addressing greater accessibility works. We do want our Parliament to be open and have everybody really have the opportunity to visit and participate in the Parliament as much as possible.
Okay, thank you so much to our three speakers, Paul Brunton and Ryan Panton and Lyndall Smith. Thank you. Now, luckily, we've filmed this tonight, so it will be available on our website in the next week sometime. Now, there's a couple of things. If you would like to know more, this is out the front for sale. Paul was one of the editors on this, and it is an extraordinary reference book. So as you're leaving, if you'd like to. Now, we have not stopped people coming into the building. We have our student program running daily, school students that come into the chambers and do their role plays. We have public tours, as I've already spoken to you about. Now, on the 25th to the 28th of September, I'm running the school holiday program online for children up to 12 years of age, and they'll get to meet Sir Henry Parkes again, rising from whatever. Okay, and our next event is during History Week. It's the 6th of September, and the theme this year is Voices from the Past, and our event will be Petitions, the Power of Voices. Now, I'm going to send you a Survey Monkey survey in the morning. How would you feel about filling that in for me? Would that be all right? Because really, our programs are a response to what people are interested in. If you're interested in this type of house talk, we're interested in putting it on for you. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you didn't get exhausted in that very quick tour at the beginning. I would remind you, if you've lost your mobile phone, your Opal card and any other personal possessions, come and see me before you leave this room. And the exit will go out both sides, but it will be the way you came in, up that ramp, which is the temporary entry and exit to the building. And, also, now, I look after student programs in the Parliament. So these are all our student programs. I'd like you to take one of these brochures and give it to your children, your children's children, to encourage them to come here, because you can go to Canberra and you can sit in the bleachers, or you can come to the Parliament of New South Wales and sit in the bear pit and actually debate a bill. So thank you once again for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the event.